in the fields of life, there are people's stories who need to be told more than once. These people are considered legends. A Pony Express rider, a Union soldier, a buffalo hunter, and a skilled showman. He even founded a town. His name? William Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill. We must first ask ourselves, how did William Cody truly become legendary and become Buffalo Bill? And why was he important to the World's Fair in 1893? Before Cody started his own show, he worked on many others, starting out as an actor in other Western themes, even working with Wild Bill Hickok. In 1872, William Cody had just started out as an actor, working with the likes of Wild Bill Hickok. But in 1874, he had founded his own show, and began to rise to the top as one of the premier Western shows in the world. He even took many trips and tours across America and even Europe. His performance in the 1893 World Fair was considered the pinnacle of his career. His shows featured sharpshooters, riding stunts, roping, buffalo hunters, and often brave attacks of the Wild West Indians on frontier cabins, where a herd of cowboys and a posse would go against the American Indians. His shows truly emphasize the bold nature and the untamed of the American West. Now, as far as how it relates to the Frontier in American History by Frederick Jackson Turner, I would have to say that the spirit of Buffalo Bill's show, like I talked about before, truly represents what the Wild West was about, and it wanted to bring that experience to people far and wide who hadn't got to experience that frontier. But Frederick Jackson Turner, for the most part, talks about how the frontier has been settled by the Americans, and how we've pretty well got the actual frontier out of the way, which is kind of different than what William Cody's saying. Now, there is a quote in the deal, and the quote is, "The frontier is the outer edge of the wave, the meeting point between savagery and civilization," and I believe that is portrayed in Buffalo Bill's show. Now, if I really had to say how these two related, Frederick Jackson's main point of his essay is that the American West, the frontier, made America different than Europe and made us special. In a way, people in Europe wanted to see Buffalo Bill's show and see the American West, which in my mind relates. Now, as far as how Buffalo Bill's show and Buffalo Bill himself related to the lecture on Haiti, I would have this to say about it. A lot of Buffalo Bill's stuff portrayed the American Indians as savages, but in reality, he also made them a huge part of his show, and Native Americans oftentimes got to show their skills as riders and skills of their people. And although he was framed as a famous Indian hunter, Buffalo Bill had lots of them in his show, and he treated them equally. From the research I've found, Buffalo Bill was not only a huge advocate for Native American rights later in his career, but he was also an advocate for women's rights, which in terms of how it relates to the lecture on Haiti, Frederick Douglass, talking about it, wanted people to acknowledge African Americans and people of Haiti as people and didn't want to ignore them. So although William Cody didn't talk much about the rights of African Americans, I think it's fair to assume that if he's fighting for the Union as a Union soldier once in his life and supporting Native Americans' rights and women's rights, I think he'd be for African Americans too. And although it's kind of hard to draw a parallel between the lecture on Haiti and the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, I think you can drive a parallel there between Frederick Douglass and Buffalo Bill and how they were as people. A quote I personally think that relates is, "No people would be likely soon to forget such treatment and fail to resent it in one form or another." And I feel like that mainly focuses on how the people of Haiti and slaves in general were treated, but I also think it can be related to how women were treated. Although and Native Americans, although slaves probably got the worst end of that deal. Everyone suffered in a way. Alas, this brings us to the end of our video. What truly makes a legend is not what he did, but what he stood for. It wasn't being an American soldier, a great showman, an Indian fighter that made Buffalo Bill a legend. It was what he stood for and the fact that he had compassion and he cared about others. A true American hero.